Rick popped the cork on a bottle of cheap sparkling wine right there on the concrete steps of the county courthouse. The foam spilled over his knuckles, dripping onto the dirty pavement, but he didn't care. He was laughing that loud, barking laugh that used to make me feel safe, but now just sounded like a car engine grinding its gears. It was 90 degrees in the shade, the kind of Georgia heat that sticks your shirt to your back the second you step outside. But I felt cold, freezing cold. I was clutching the manila envelope containing my copy of the divorce decree so hard the edges were crumpling into my palm. "Free at last!" Rick shouted, raising the bottle toward the busy street like he'd just won the Super Bowl. "To the end of the ball and chain!" Tara was draped over him, giggling. She was wearing a dress the color of a fire engine, tight enough to show every curve, and she looked at me with this pitying, sickly, sweet expression that made me want to scream. She took a sip from the plastic cup Rick had pulled out of his back pocket. "Babe, don't be mean," Tara cooed, though her eyes were glittering with malice. "Sadie looks devastated. We should be graceful winners." "Winners?" I managed to choke out. My voice sounded rusty, like I hadn't used it in years. "Rick, we were married for 3 years. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay off your truck. I paid the rent on the apartment you're currently sleeping in with her. And you're celebrating?" Rick's grin didn't falter. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "That's exactly why I'm celebrating, Sadie. You were always so heavy. Always talking about bills, always talking about saving. It was exhausting. Tara knows how to live. She's fun. You're just a drag." He stepped closer, the smell of cheap alcohol and stale cologne hitting me in a wave. He leaned in, lowering his voice so the passers-by wouldn't hear the venom. "Face it, Sadie. You're a loser. You were a loser when I found you in that trailer park, and you're a loser now. Enjoy going back to being nobody. I bet you can't even afford a cab ride out of here." Tara giggled again, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. "Oh, stop it, Rick. She can probably take the bus, if she has exact change." I felt tears pricking the corners of my eyes, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I refused to cry, not in front of them, not when they looked so happy to see me broken. I had $7 in my bank account. 7. Rick had drained the joint savings account, $800 intended for the electric bill and groceries, to buy that bottle of wine and probably a nice dinner for Tara. "You're pathetic," I whispered. "I'm free," Rick corrected. "And you're broke. Go find some other charity case to leech off of. I'm done." I turned to walk away, my shoes scuffing against the sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going. The bus stop was 3 blocks away and the heat was making the world swim in front of my eyes. I just needed to get away from the sound of their laughter. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I hadn't taken 5 steps when the atmosphere on the street shifted. You know that feeling when the air pressure drops right before a tornado touches down? It was like that. The normal noise of traffic, the honking, the engines, the shouting, just died away. I looked up, squinting against the sun. Rolling down the street was a motorcade. Not just one nice car, but a fleet of them. 4 massive, blacked-out sedans, moving in perfect synchronization like sharks patrolling a reef. They were Maybachs. I recognized the Double M logo from magazines I used to read in the break room at work, dreaming of a life I'd never have. Rick and Tara stopped laughing. The bottle of wine lowered in Rick's hand. "Whoa," Rick muttered. "Check that out. Must be a senator or something." The cars didn't pass us. They slowed down, their tires crunching softly against the curb directly in front of where I was standing. The lead car, a beast of a machine that probably cost more than every house in my childhood neighborhood combined, came to a halt. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, wearing a suit that was tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He had silver hair swept back immaculately, and the kind of posture that made you want to stand up straighter just by looking at him. He ignored the gawking pedestrians. He ignored the security guards by the courthouse doors. And most satisfyingly, he completely ignored Rick and Tara. He walked straight up to me. I took a nervous step back, clutching my divorce papers against my chest like a shield. Excuse me? The man stopped 3 feet away, and to my absolute shock, he bowed. It wasn't a nod. It was a deep, respectful, waist-bending bow, like I was royalty. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and carried a weight of authority that made my knees shake. I apologize for the delay. Traffic on the interstate was heavier than anticipated. We are ready to transport you home. Silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. "Vance?" Rick spluttered from behind me. "Buddy, you got the wrong girl. That's Sadie Phillips. She's a waitress." The man, Mr. Evans, I would later learn, didn't even turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on mine. "Miss Vance, the chairman is waiting. Please." He gestured toward the open door of the Maybach. The interior looked like the inside of a spaceship. Cream leather, soft blue lighting, and air conditioning that I could feel pouring out onto the sidewalk. I think you have the wrong person," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "My name is Sadie." "We know who you are, miss," Mr. Evans said softly. There was a look in his eyes, not pity, but a sort of urgent patience. "Please, get in the car. I will explain everything, but we cannot stay here. It is not safe." "Not safe?" I looked back at Rick. His mouth was hanging open, a little bit of spit pooling in the corner. Tara looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. They looked small, petty. And suddenly, the idea of getting on a hot, crowded bus with my $7 seemed impossible. If this was a kidnapping, at least it was a luxurious one. "Okay," I whispered. I stepped toward the car. Mr. Evans held the door, placing a hand over the frame to protect my head. As I slid into the seat, I caught one last glimpse of Rick. He took a step forward, looking like he wanted to grab me, to claim ownership again now that someone important was interested. "Hey, wait a minute," Rick yelled. Mr. Evans turned then. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Rick with a gaze so cold it could have frozen hell over. Then he slammed the heavy door shut, sealing me inside a silent, air-conditioned cocoon, leaving my old life and my ex-husband on the dirty curb. The car began to move before I had even fully settled into the seat. The silence inside was profound. The chaos of the street, Rick's shouting, the traffic, was instantly cut off, replaced by the low hum of the engine and the smell of expensive leather. It smelled like money. Mr. Evans sat across from me in the rear cabin, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I looked down at my clothes, a faded floral dress I'd bought at a thrift store for $4 and scuffed flats. I looked like a stain on the upholstery. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "And why did you call me Miss Vance?" Mr. Evans reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek, thin tablet. He tapped the screen a few times and handed it to me. "Your legal name is Zoe Vance," he said matter-of-factly. "You are the biological daughter of Elijah Vance, the CEO and majority shareholder of Solaris Ventures." I stared at the tablet. It showed a photo of a man, Elijah Vance. I recognized him from the news. He was a titan of industry, the kind of man whose face appeared on the cover of business magazines. Beside his photo was a picture of a little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting on his lap. She had my eyes, my nose, and that distinct unruly curl in her hair that I had spent 20 years trying to straighten. "This is ridiculous," I said, pushing the tablet back toward him. "My parents were dairy farmers in Alabama. They died in a car wreck when I was 6. My grandmother raised me until she passed away 3 years ago. I'm Sadie Phillips." "Your adoptive parents were dairy farmers," Mr. Evans corrected gently, "and they were good people. They were chosen specifically for their integrity and their isolation." Chosen? The word felt like a slap. "You make me sound like a project." "You were a target, Miss Vance." Mr. Evans leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. 22 years ago, there was an incident, a credible threat against the Vance family. Your mother was killed. I gasped. My hand flew to my mouth. To ensure your safety, Mr. Vance made the hardest decision of his life, Evans continued. He erased your existence. He sent you away to live a humble, invisible life where his enemies would never think to look. He watched you from afar. He ensured you were safe, fed, educated within the public system, but he could never make contact. Until now. Why now? I demanded. Anger started to bubble up through the shock. Why now? Do you know what my life has been like? I've been scrubbing grease off diner floors for minimum wage. I married a man who treated me like garbage because I was desperate for a family. I've been humiliated, broke, and hungry. And you're telling me my father is a billionaire who was just watching? Mr. Evans looked down for a moment, a flicker of shame crossing his stoic face. The threat has been neutralized, or so we believed. But more importantly, Mr. Vance is dying. He has very little time left, and Solaris Ventures is in grave danger. He needs you to take your rightful place. I don't know anything about running a company, I said, looking out the tinted window as the city skyline gave way to the lush, green suburbs of the wealthy. I struggle to balance my checkbook. You are a survivor, Miss Vance, Evans said. You survived poverty. You survived a toxic marriage. You survived the world without a safety net. That requires a strength that the boardroom sharks do not possess. Mr. Vance believes in you. I looked at my hands. They were rough, calloused from years of manual labor. Could these hands run an empire? Or was I just being traded from one cage to another? If I go with you, I said slowly, does that mean I never have to see Rick again? Mr. Price is a non-entity, Evans said with a dismissive wave of his hand. He belongs to a past that no longer exists. We drove through a massive wrought iron gate that looked like the entrance to a fortress. The driveway was lined with century-old oak trees, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out the sun. After a mile-long drive, the house appeared. It wasn't a house, it was a palace. It was a sprawling estate of white stone, columns and endless windows. It looked like the White House, but bigger and colder. As the car pulled up to the main entrance, I felt a wave of nausea. My apartment, the one Rick was currently trashing, was 600 square feet. The foyer of this place probably had its own zip code. Mr. Evans opened my door. "Welcome home, Miss Vance." I stepped out, my legs feeling like jelly. The front door's massive slabs of mahogany swung open. A woman was standing there. She was tall, elegant, wearing a gray silk dress that flowed around her like water. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. "Zoe?" she whispered. She rushed down the steps. I flinched, expecting a handshake or a formal greeting, but she pulled me into a hug that knocked the wind out of me. She smelled like lavender and expensive soap. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed into my shoulder. "You look just like her. You look just like your mother." I stood there, awkward and stiff, my arms hanging by my sides. I'm sorry. Who are you?" She pulled back, wiping her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I'm Eleanor. I'm your father's wife. Your stepmother, I suppose. Though I hate that word." Stepmother. In the fairy tales, the stepmother was always the villain, but Eleanor looked at me with such genuine relief that I felt my defenses crack just a little. "Come inside," she said, taking my hand. Her skin was soft, unblemished by work. "He's been waiting for you. He held on just for you." She led me inside. The interior was breathtaking, but in a terrifying way. The floors were marble polished to a mirror shine. The ceilings were 30 feet high, adorned with crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. But it was silent, dead silent. There were no family photos on the walls, no coats thrown over a chair, no mail on a side table. It felt like a museum where happiness was forbidden. "It's a bit quiet," I murmured, my voice echoing. "It's been a mausoleum for 20 years, Eleanor said sadly. "Your father stopped living the day he sent you away. He just existed. He built the company. He made billions, but he never smiled. Not once." We walked up a grand staircase that seemed to go on forever. I felt small. I felt like an imposter in my cheap dress, tracking invisible dirt onto their pristine world. "He's in the master suite," Eleanor said as we reached a set of double doors at the end of a long hallway. She turned to me, gripping my hand tighter. "Zoe, please prepare yourself. He is not the man in the photos anymore." She pushed the doors open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of luxury, it was the sharp chemical tang of antiseptic, rubbing alcohol and sickness. It was the smell of a hospital disguised as a bedroom. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden, but the curtains were drawn, casting everything in a gloomy twilight. In the center of the room was a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and IV poles. Lying in the bed was a skeleton. That was the only way to describe him. The man in the photos, the powerful, broad-shouldered titan, was gone. In his place was a frail, wasted figure. His skin was translucent, stretching tight over his cheekbones. His hair was thin and white. "Elijah," Eleanor whispered softly. "She's here. Zoe is here." The man's eyelids fluttered. It seemed to take every ounce of his strength just to open them. His eyes were cloudy, but when they landed on me, a spark of recognition lit them up. It was like seeing a lighthouse turn on in a storm. "Zoe," he rasped. His voice was barely a sound, just air moving over dry chords. I walked to the side of the bed. I didn't know what to feel. This man was my father. He was also the man who had abandoned me to a life of struggle. I wanted to scream at him for every night I went to bed hungry, for every bill I couldn't pay. But looking at him now, hooked up to machines that breathed for him, my anger deflated into a heavy, crushing sadness. "I'm here," I said. My voice broke. He tried to lift his hand. It trembled violently. I reached out and took it. His fingers were ice cold and felt fragile, like bird bones. "Sorry," he wheezed. A tear leaked from the corner of his eye, tracking through the deep lines of his face. Sorry. Had to protect." "Shh," I said, squeezing his hand. "Don't talk. Save your strength." He shook his head weakly, agitation rising in his chest. The heart monitor beeped faster. "No. Time. Listen. The company. Wolves. Derek. Ross. Don't trust. Derek Ross." The name sounded familiar. He was the vice president. I'd seen him on the news talking about Solaris Ventures' record profits while I was counting pennies for gas money. "Derek Ross?" I asked. "What about him?" "He stole," Elijah gasped. "He was fighting for air now. Taking everything. You must stop him." "Elijah, please," Eleanor said, stepping forward to adjust his pillow. "You're distressing yourself." "Tablet," he commanded, looking at Evans, who had been standing silently in the shadows. Evans stepped forward. "The chairman has been incapacitated for nearly a year, Miss Vance. In that time, Vice President Ross has assumed de facto control. He has scheduled a shareholder vote for tomorrow morning to approve a project that Mr. Vance believes is fraudulent. If that vote passes, the company's assets will be drained." "Tomorrow morning?" I stared at Evans. "I just got here. I don't know anything about corporate finance. I can't stop a vote." Elijah squeezed my hand with surprising strength. His eyes locked onto mine, fierce and desperate. "Blood," he whispered. "You are my blood. Fight." Then his strength gave out. His hand went limp in mine and his eyes drifted shut. The monitor settled into a steady, rhythmic beep. "He's sleeping," Eleanor said, letting out a shaky breath. "He spends most of his time sleeping now." I looked down at my father's unconscious form. He had given me a name, a fortune, and a war, and I had no armor. "There is no Wi-Fi in this wing of the house," Mr. Evans said, pushing a heavy steel cart into the library where I was sitting. "And we have disabled the external lines to the main server. Mr. Ross monitors the digital network. If you access the files online, he will know you are here." "So, I have to do this the old-fashioned way?" I asked, eyeing the stacks of bankers' boxes on the cart. "Paper leaves no digital footprint," Evans replied. "These are the physical ledgers from the last 3 fiscal years. I smuggled them out of the headquarters last night." It was midnight. The mansion was dark and silent save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. I had changed into a pair of silk pajamas Eleanor had lent me, but I didn't feel rested. I felt wired. I poured myself a cup of black coffee from the silver carafe Evans had brought. "Okay, show me what I'm looking for." Evans opened the first box. "The project is called Project Azure. It is a resort development in the Bahamas. Mr. Ross claims it requires an investment of $500 million. $500 million. The number was so big it didn't feel real. It was monopoly money. "Okay," I said, cracking my knuckles. "Let's see the breakdown." I spent the first hour just trying to understand the formatting. It was a maze of acronyms and spreadsheets. But as the clock chimed 1, then 2, something strange happened. The numbers started to make sense. Not because I was a financial genius, but because I was poor. When you're poor, you know exactly what things cost. You know that a gallon of milk is $3.50. You know that a late fee is $35. You know when someone is overcharging you. I pulled out a binder labeled Construction Estimates. "Evans," I said, squinting at a line item. "Look at this. They have listed site preparation and leveling at $12 million. "Is that unusual?" Evans asked. "My ex-husband, Rick, worked construction for a year before he got fired," I said, tapping the page. "I used to read his invoices to help him with the math. Site prep for a project this size involves heavy machinery and crew, sure, but $12 million. That's inflated by at least 300%. And look at the contractor." I pointed to the name, Iberian Construction. "I've never heard of them," Evans admitted. "Neither have I," I said. "And that's the problem. If you're building a $500 million resort, you hire a global firm. You don't hire a ghost." I grabbed another file. Materials. I scanned the list. High-grade marble flooring, $400 per square foot. I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. I looked into renovating the bathroom in our apartment once. Even the rarest Italian marble tops out at around $100 a square foot if you buy in bulk. He's padding the invoices. "He is skimming," Evans said, his face darkening. "He's not skimming," I said, slamming the file shut. "He's looting. He's funneling the money out through these fake costs. If this vote passes tomorrow, $500 million leaves the company accounts and goes to wherever Iberian Construction actually is." I looked up at Evans. My eyes were burning from fatigue, but my brain was on fire. For 3 years, Rick had told me I was stupid. He told me I was useless with money because I couldn't make his meager paycheck cover his gambling debts. But he was wrong. I was good at this. I was good at spotting a liar because I had lived with one. "We need proof that Iberian is a shell company," I said. "Do we have their incorporation papers?" "Somewhere in this stack," Evans said, beginning to dig. We worked through the night. By 4 a.m, the library table was covered in papers. We found it. Iberian Construction was registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. Its sole director was a man named John Doe, literally a placeholder name. I held the document in my hand. It was a smoking gun. "He thinks I'm a country bumpkin," I whispered. He thinks the heir is going to be some scared little girl who will sign whatever he puts in front of her. I stood up, stretching my stiff back. The sun was just starting to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "Mr. Evans," I said, "what time is the board meeting?" 9 o'clock sharp, he replied. "Good," I said. "I need a shower, and I need a suit. If I'm going to war, I need to look like a Vance." I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing room, staring at a stranger. Eleanor had brought in a team, a tailor, a stylist, a makeup artist, at 6 a.m. They had poked and prodded me for 2 hours, treating my body like a lump of clay that needed to be sculpted into something acceptable. The woman in the mirror was wearing an ivory power suit that probably cost more than my entire education. The fabric was crisp, sharp, creating angles on my body where before there had just been soft curves. My hair, usually a frizzy mess tied up with a rubber band, was blown out straight and sleek, falling over my shoulders like a curtain of dark silk. "It fits," Eleanor said, standing behind me. She was holding a small velvet box. "It feels like a costume," I muttered, tugging at the cuff. "I feel like I'm 5 years old playing dress-up in my mom's closet." "It is armor," Eleanor corrected firmly. "Those men in that boardroom are wolves. If you walk in there looking like a victim, they will eat you alive before you even sit down. You have to look like you own the building." She opened the box. Inside was a brooch, a sapphire butterfly encrusted with tiny diamonds. It caught the light, shimmering blue and white. "This belonged to your mother," Eleanor said, her voice softening. "She wore it the day she married your father. She said butterflies are symbols of transformation. They go into the cocoon as one thing and come out as something completely different." I touched the cold metal of the brooch. My mother. The woman who died so I could be hidden away in a trailer park. "Did she fight them too?" I asked. "She tried," Eleanor said, pinning the brooch to my lapel. Her hands were shaking slightly. "But she didn't have your anger, Zoe. Use it." I looked at my reflection again. The fear was still there, hiding behind the makeup. But the suit made me look dangerous. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of the jacket. "Let's go," I said. "I don't want to be late for my own execution." The elevator ride to the top floor of the Solaris Tower took exactly 45 seconds. I counted every single one to keep from hyperventilating. Mr. Evans stood beside me, silent as a statue, holding the briefcase containing the physical ledgers. When the door slid open, the air pressure seemed to change. The hallway was lined with glass, overlooking the Atlanta skyline. We walked toward the double doors at the end. I could hear voices inside, low, rumbling, confident male voices. Evans pushed the doors open. The conversation inside cut off instantly. There were 12 men sitting around a mahogany table that was long enough to land a plane on. They were all older, wearing dark suits, their faces varying shades of bored or annoyed. At the head of the table sat a man I recognized immediately, Derek Ross. He was younger than the others, maybe early 40s, with a tan that looked artificial and teeth that were too white. He was leaning back in the chairman's chair, my father's chair, twirling a gold pen between his fingers. He didn't stand up. "Well," Ross said, a smirk playing on his lips, "the long-lost daughter returns. We were just about to start without you, Miss Vance, is it? Or do you still go by Phillips?" The disrespect was palpable. He was marking his territory. "It's Vance," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. I walked to the empty seat at the opposite end of the table. "And you are sitting in my father's chair, Mr. Ross." Ross laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Technically, this is the acting CEO's chair, which is me. You're here as an observer, Zoe, a courtesy. Don't confuse your presence with power." He tapped a stack of documents in front of him. "Now, gentlemen, let's proceed. Item 1, the vote on Project Azure. As you know, this is a time-sensitive opportunity. We need to release the funds by noon to secure the land rights. I have a question, I said, remaining standing. Ross sighed theatrically, checking his watch. Zoe, look, I know this is all new and exciting for you, but we are discussing complex financial instruments here. This isn't balancing a checkbook at a grocery store. Why don't you sit down, listen, and learn? I'm not here to learn, I said, signaling Evans. He slammed the heavy briefcase onto the table with a loud thud. The sound made two of the board members jump. I'm here to ask why we are paying $12 million for dirt. Ross stopped twirling his pen. His eyes narrowed, just a fraction. Excuse me? I opened the briefcase and pulled out the binder we had flagged the night before. I threw it onto the polished wood. It slid across the table and stopped right in front of an elderly board member with thick glasses. Page 14, I said, my voice steady, though my knees were knocking together under the table. Site preparation costs for the Bahamas location. $12 million allocated to a company called Iberian Construction. Standard contracting fees, Ross said smoothly, waving his hand. The terrain is difficult, volcanic rock. It requires specialized equipment. I checked the geological surveys for that region. I lied. I hadn't checked the surveys, but I watched enough Discovery Channel to know the Bahamas were limestone, not volcanic. It's limestone, soft rock. And even if it were solid diamond, $12 million is 3 times the market rate for a site that size. Market rates fluctuate, Ross said, his smile tightening at the edges. You're looking at raw data without context. Okay, let's talk context, I said. I pulled out the second document, the corporate registration we had found. Iberian Construction, registered 3 months ago. P.O. Box 442 in the Cayman Islands. No website, no previous projects, no employees listed other than a registered agent. The elderly board member pushed his glasses up his nose, flipping through the binder. She's right, he mumbled. There is no breakdown of labor costs here. It's just a lump sum. This is absurd, Ross snapped, finally standing up. We use holding companies for liability reasons. This is standard industry practice. Are we really going to let a waitress dictate corporate strategy? She doesn't even have a degree. I don't need a degree to know when I'm being robbed, I shot back, and neither do they. I looked around the table, making eye contact with every man there. If you vote for this project, you aren't investing $500 million. You are gifting it to a ghost company that Mr. Ross controls. And when the shareholders find out, it won't be Ross going to jail alone. It will be the entire board for negligence. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I moved to veto Project Azure, I said, channeling every ounce of authority I could muster. And I moved to launch an immediate internal audit of all contracts signed by Vice President Ross in the last 12 months. You can't do that, Ross shouted, his face flushing a blotchy red. I am the acting CEO. And I am the majority shareholder proxy, I said, pointing to Evans, who held up the notarized power of attorney document we had signed with my father's trembling hand just hours ago. Sit down, Derek. The elderly board member closed the binder. He looked at Ross, then at me. I second the motion for an audit, he said quietly. Ross looked around the room, waiting for his allies to jump in. But they were all looking at the table, avoiding his gaze, rats fleeing a sinking ship. Fine, Ross hissed, gathering his papers. Audit whatever you want. You'll find nothing but profit. But remember this, Zoe, you just started a war you are not equipped to fight. The meeting dissolved into chaos immediately after the vote. The board members, suddenly terrified of legal liability, swarmed around me, shaking my hand, congratulating me on my sharp eye. It was sickening. 10 minutes ago, they were ready to let Ross loot the place. Now they acted like I was the savior. I escaped to the CEO's office, my father's real office. It was a cavernous space with a view that stretched all the way to the horizon. I closed the door and leaned back against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. My adrenaline was crashing. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't unclasp them. I had won, but I felt empty. I looked around the room. It was cold, impersonal, just like the mansion. Was this my life now? Fighting with men in suits over money I didn't earn? There was a knock at the door. I scrambled up, smoothing my skirt. "Come in," I called out. It wasn't Evans. It was the executive receptionist, a young woman who looked terrified. "Miss Vance?" she squeaked. "I'm so sorry to disturb you. Security is asking for instructions. There is a man in the lobby. He says he's your husband." My blood ran cold. "My husband?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am, a Mr. Rick Price. He's making quite a scene. He says he's here to support you in your time of transition. He has flowers." I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound that bubbled up from my chest. Of course he was here. The news of the lost heiress must have hit the internet. Rick smelled money like a shark smells blood. "He claims he has family rights to enter," the receptionist added nervously. "Family rights," I said, tasting the bitterness of the words. "Tell security to hold him there. I'm coming down." "Are you sure, miss?" Evans appeared behind the receptionist. "We can have him removed quietly." "No," I said, walking past them toward the elevator. "Quietly is how he wins. He likes to make scenes? Fine. Let's give him a show." The lobby of Solaris Tower was a masterpiece of glass and steel, echoing with the footsteps of hundreds of employees going to lunch. In the center of it all stood Rick. He had changed out of his greasy t-shirt. He was wearing his court shirt, a button-down that was too tight in the neck, and holding a bouquet of supermarket roses that were already starting to droop. He was shouting at a security guard who was twice his size. "I'm telling you, she's my wife," Rick yelled, waving his hand. "We're just going through a rough patch. She needs me." I stepped out of the executive elevator. The two bodyguards flanking me made a path through the crowd of onlookers. "Rick," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the cavernous lobby it carried. Rick spun around. His eyes widened when he saw me. He took in the ivory suit, the hair, the diamonds. For a second, he looked intimidated. Then, the greed took over. He put on his best puppy dog face, the one he used whenever he lost his paycheck at the track. "Sadie, baby!" He rushed forward, but the guards blocked him. "God, look at you. You look incredible. I knew it. I always knew you were special." "You knew?" I asked, stopping 10 feet away. "Is that why you were popping champagne on the courthouse steps yesterday?" "That? Baby, that was a defense mechanism," Rick pleaded, clutching the wilted flowers. "I was hurting. I was just trying to mask the pain. But seeing you now, I realize I can't live without you. We can fix this. I can help you run this place. We're a team, remember?" The crowd was whispering. Phones were out, recording. This was going to be on TikTok in 5 minutes. "A team," I repeated, "like you and Tara." "Tara is nobody." Rick dismissed her with a wave. "She means nothing to me. It's always been you, Sadie. Please, just give me a chance to show you how much I love you." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "You know, Rick," I said, tapping the screen, "you have a bad habit of butt-dialing people. You left me a voicemail 3 weeks ago. I saved it. I think everyone should hear it." I nodded to the security chief at the desk. He plugged an auxiliary cord into the lobby's PA system. I connected my phone. A second later, Rick's voice boomed through the speakers, magnified 100 times. "Dumb cow actually thinks I'm looking for a job. I'm telling you, Tara, she's perfect. She pays for everything. She cooks, she cleans, and she's too stupid to leave. I'm going to ride this gravy train until the wheels fall off. Then I'll dump her back in the trailer park where she belongs." Tara's voice giggled on the recording. "You're so bad, Rick." "I'm not bad. I'm smart. Why work when you have a mule to carry you?" The recording ended with a screech of static. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on Rick. His face had gone from pale to a deep, bruised purple. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. "You're right about one thing, Rick," I said, my voice icy calm. "The wheels just fell off." I turned to the guards. "Get this trash out of my building." Rick didn't fight. He was too stunned. He let them grab him by the arms and drag him backward toward the revolving doors. The flowers fell from his hand, scattering petals across the polished marble floor. I turned around and walked back to the elevator, keeping my head high. But inside, I was shaking. The adrenaline didn't last. By 9:00 p.m., I was the only one left on the executive floor. I had spent the last 6 hours reviewing audit protocols with a team of lawyers who charged more per hour than I used to make in a month. My head was pounding. I just wanted to go back to the mansion and sleep for a week. "I'll bring the car around front, Miss Vance," Evans had texted me. "No," I texted back. "I need to walk." "I'll meet you in the garage." I needed a moment of silence. Just 5 minutes to breathe air that wasn't recycled through an HVAC system. I took the elevator down to the parking garage. It was a concrete cavern, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. It smelled of oil and damp dust. My heels clicked loudly on the concrete, the sound echoing back at me like gunshots. I walked toward the black sedan parked in the reserved spot marked CEO. As I got closer, I slowed down. The car looked tilted. I walked around to the driver's side. The front tire was shredded, not just flat, slashed. Ribbons of rubber lay on the concrete. My breath hitched in my throat. This was a secure garage. You needed a key card to get in. "Hello," I called out. My voice trembled. Silence. Just the hum of the ventilation fans. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a piece of white paper. I pulled it out. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten in thick red marker. The ink looked like blood in the bad lighting. "Know your place, trash. This is only the beginning." A chill ran down my spine, sharper than the air conditioning. This wasn't Rick. Rick was stupid and loud. This was quiet. This was calculated. I spun around, scanning the shadows between the concrete pillars. Was someone watching me right now? Click. A sound from the far corner, a footstep. I didn't wait to find out. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I dialed Evans. "Evans!" I hissed as soon as he picked up. "The garage, now! Someone slashed the tires." "Stay in the vehicle, Miss Vance," Evans said, his voice instantly shifting to combat mode. "Lock the doors. I am 30 seconds away." I dove into the back seat of the crippled car and slammed the door, locking it. I huddled down below the window line, clutching the note in my hand. The red ink had smeared onto my thumb. I wasn't playing dress-up anymore. The wolves weren't just in the boardroom, they were hunting. The Atlanta Business Summit was less of a meeting and more of a Shark Tank where everyone wore tuxedos. The ballroom was freezing, chilled to a crisp 65 degrees to keep the expensive makeup from melting off the trophy wives. I stood in the corner, clutching a glass of sparkling water so hard I thought the stem might snap. I was wearing a midnight blue silk dress that Eleanor had picked out. It was beautiful, backless, and cost $4,000. But I felt like I was wrapped in plastic wrap. Every time I moved, the silk whispered against my skin, reminding me I didn't belong here. "Don't look at the floor," Evans had whispered in my ear before disappearing into the shadows. "Look them in the eye." I tried, but every time I made eye contact, I saw the same thing, curiosity mixed with disdain. They knew the story. The waitress turned heiress. The Beverly Hillbillies come to life. "Oh, excuse me." The voice was high and sharp. I felt a cold splash hit my bare arm, followed by the wet, spreading warmth of liquid soaking into my sleeve. I jumped back. A woman with blonde curls and a dress that looked like spun gold was standing there, holding an empty wine glass. A dark red stain was already blooming on my blue silk, looking like a fresh bruise. "It's so dark in here," the woman said, her voice dripping with fake apology. She didn't offer a napkin. She smiled. "I didn't see you standing there. You blend into the curtains so well." Her friend, a brunette with lips that looked painful to move, snickered. "Careful, Ash. That's the new Vance girl. She probably thinks this is fancy juice." "It's a $200 Cabernet," the blonde said, examining her empty glass with tragic disappointment. "What a waste." My face burned. I could feel the eyes of the nearby groups turning toward us. This was high school all over again, just with better jewelry. I opened my mouth to apologize, a reflex from years of customer service, but stopped myself. "Armor," Eleanor had said. "It's fine," I said, my voice tight. "Accidents happen, especially when you've had a few too many." The blonde's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" "The wine," I said, pointing to her glass. "It stains. I hope you didn't get any on your rental." The blonde opened her mouth to screech something back, but a shadow fell over us. "Actually," a deep voice interrupted, "that particular vintage is known for its high tannin content. It stains terribly, but club soda lifts it right out if you catch it in under 2 minutes." We all turned. A man was standing there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black tuxedo that fit him like it was engineered rather than sewn. He had dark hair and eyes that were intensely focused. He didn't look at the blonde. He looked at me. He pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his pocket and dipped it into my glass of sparkling water. "May I?" he asked. I nodded, too stunned to speak. He gently dabbed at the stain on my sleeve. He didn't rub, he blotted, his movements precise and careful. "Keith," the blonde said, her voice suddenly breathless and desperate for attention. "I was just telling her, I saw what happened, Ashley," the man said without looking up. "You tripped over your own ego. Go find a waiter to refill your glass, and maybe drink some water." The dismissal was total. Ashley turned a shade of pink that clashed with her dress, grabbed her friend's arm, and scurried away. The man finished blotting. The stain had faded significantly. He handed me the damp handkerchief. "You're Zoe Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, "and you're efficient." He smiled. It was a small, crooked smile that didn't match the severity of his suit. It triggered a memory in the back of my brain, a flash of a scraped knee and a shared popsicle. "Keith Sullivan," he said, "CEO of TerraVision. But 20 years ago, I was just the kid who lived next door to the dairy farm. You threw a rock at me once because I scared your chickens." My jaw dropped. "The Sullivan boy? The one who broke his arm jumping off the hayloft?" "The very same," Keith said. His smile faded slightly, replaced by a serious intensity. "I heard you were back. I didn't believe it until tonight. Look, Zoe, this world, it's not like the farm. People here smile while they hold the knife." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy cardstock business card. "Call me," he said. "Not for a date, for survival. You have enemies you don't even see yet." I called him the next morning. I sat in the library surrounded by the smell of old paper and the new, terrifying scent of lemon polish that the maids used. "I didn't think you'd call," Keith answered on the first ring. "Someone slashed my tires in the company garage 2 nights ago," I said bluntly, "and left a note written in red marker. I'm done pretending this is a game." There was a pause on the line. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "It's escalating faster than I thought," Keith said. "Zoe, are you familiar with the term short selling?" "I know it means betting against a stock," I said. "Rick used to talk about it when he pretended to be a day trader." "It's more than betting," Keith explained. "It's incentivized destruction. I've been tracking the market activity around Solaris Ventures. There's a pattern. Massive sell-offs happening exactly 3 minutes before bad news leaks." "Leaks?" I asked. "The rumors about your incompetence," Keith said. The stories about the waitress CEO crashing the board meeting, those aren't accidents. They are coordinated press leaks designed to drive the stock price down. Who? A firm called Helix Capital, Keith said. They have taken a massive short position against Solaris. If the stock crashes, they make billions. If the stock recovers, they lose everything. And let me guess, I said, connecting the dots Evans and I had started to see. Derek Ross has a connection to Helix. I can't prove that yet, Keith said, but Helix appeared out of nowhere 6 months ago, right around the time your father went into the coma. Zoe, this isn't just about stealing money from a construction project. They are trying to bankrupt the entire company so they can buy the pieces for pennies on the dollar. My hand tightened on the phone. They want to kill Solaris. Yes, Keith said darkly. And you are the only variable they didn't account for. Be careful. If you fix the stock price, you cost them billions. People kill for a lot less than that. I needed to know who I was fighting. Not the corporate shells, but the people. I met the private investigator, a man named Miller, at a Waffle House off the interstate. It was the first time in a week I felt comfortable. The smell of grease and burnt coffee was familiar. Miller was a small, nervous man who wiped his glasses constantly. You said you wanted a deep dive on the ex-husband and the mistress, Miller said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the sticky table. Did you find anything? I asked, pulling out a $20 bill to pay for his coffee. The husband? He's an open book. Gambler, drinker, loudmouth. He's got debts all over town, Miller said dismissively. But the girl, Tara, she's interesting. I opened the folder. The first photo was of Tara in a bikini on a boat. The second was her walking into a gym. She has no employment record for the last 3 years, Miller said. But she lives in a condo in Buckhead that costs $3,000 a month. Rick wasn't paying for that. I flipped to the next page. It was a grainy photo of Tara walking out of an office building. She was wearing a professional skirt suit, her hair in a bun. She looked serious, efficient. I squinted at the background. The glass doors behind her had a logo etched into them, a sunburst. Solaris Ventures. Wait, I said, tapping the photo. This is my building. When was this taken? 4 years ago, Miller said, before she met Rick, before she unemployed herself. I pulled out the personnel file I had stolen from the archives the night before. I flipped through the list of executive assistants. Tara Jenkins, executive assistant to the vice president. My blood ran cold. She worked for Ross, I whispered. She was Derek Ross's assistant. And here's the kicker, Miller said, pointing to a bank statement copy. Every month, a shell company deposits $4,000 into her account. The company is registered to the same address as the lawyer who represents Derek Ross. I sat back, the plastic booth squeaking. It was a setup, all of it. Meeting Rick, the courtship, the marriage. Tara showing up as the mistress. They planted her, I realized, feeling sick. Ross knew about me. He knew where I was. He sent Tara to seduce Rick, to keep me distracted, to keep me poor and miserable so I'd never look up, never ask questions about my real family. I wasn't just a victim of a bad marriage. I was a prisoner of war, and I hadn't even known I was captured. I drove straight to the hospital wing of the mansion. The realization about Tara had lit a fire in my belly. If they were willing to orchestrate a 3-year fake marriage to keep me suppressed, what were they doing to my father? The room was quiet. The nurse was reading a magazine in the corner. "Leave us," I ordered. The nurse jumped. "Miss Vance, I have to monitor." "Get out," I snapped. "Now!" She scurried out. I walked to the bed. Elijah looked worse. His skin was gray. I looked at the IV bag dripping clear fluid into his arm. Saline. Nutrients. Standard stuff. I took his hand. I looked at his fingernails. I had listened to a podcast once about forensic pathology while scrubbing floors at the diner. They talked about signs of poisoning. There were white lines running across his fingernails, horizontal stripes. Mies lines. Arsenic, I breathed. I grabbed the patient chart from the end of the bed. I flipped through the pages. Unexplained nausea. Neuropathy. Organ failure. The doctors were treating the symptoms, calling it degenerative autoimmune disease. I grabbed the phone on the wall and dialed the internal line for Evans. "Evans," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Call an external toxicologist, not the house doctor, someone from the university. I want a full heavy metals panel done on my father's blood and hair, immediately." "Miss Vance?" Evans asked. "Do you suspect—" "He's not sick, Evans," I said, looking at the white stripes on my father's nails. "He's being murdered, and I think I know who's holding the spoon." That night, I couldn't sleep. I was pacing the floor of my father's study, waiting for the toxicology results. The house felt like it was closing in on me. Every shadow looked like an assassin. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop. I needed to check the stock prices Keith had warned me about. The screen flickered. Then it went black. "No, no, no," I muttered, hitting the keys. "Don't die on me now." A text box appeared in the center of the black screen. No sender, no subject, just a green cursor blinking. The walls have ears, but the numbers don't lie. An attachment icon appeared. File, Swiss Ledger, Ross PDF. My heart hammered against my ribs. A hacker or a friend. "Who are you?" I typed. The cursor blinked. "The Observer." Then a timer appeared. 159. E058. The file was set to self-destruct. I scrambled for the mouse. I clicked the file. It opened. It was a scan of a bank ledger from a bank in Zurich. The account holder was a shell company, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Derek Ross. And the balance, $25 million, deposited in increments that matched the consulting fees from the Bahamas project. "Print," I hissed. "Come on, come on." I hit the command. The printer in the corner whirred to life. 110. 009. The paper started to feed. 302. The screen went black again. The file was gone. But the printer kept chugging. I snatched the page from the tray as soon as it spat out. The ink was still warm. I held it up to the light. It was the link. It proved Ross was stealing. But it also proved something else. The Observer was inside the company. Someone close enough to get Ross's private banking signature. Someone who wanted him dead but couldn't pull the trigger themselves. I wasn't alone. But I didn't know if I had an ally or just another player using me as a pawn. The next afternoon, the house was silent again. The toxicology report was processing, but the waiting was driving me insane. I needed to keep my hands busy. Eleanor found me in the study, aggressively reorganizing my father's bookshelves. I was pulling out leather-bound encyclopedias and slamming them back into place, trying to burn off the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins since I found the poison evidence. "He used to hide things," Eleanor said from the doorway. She was holding a tray of tea, the china rattling slightly. "Your father. He was paranoid even before your mother died. He loved secret compartments." I stopped, holding a heavy volume of The History of Rome. "Where?" "The mahogany desk," she said, setting the tray down on a side table. "The bottom right drawer is shorter than the others. There is a false back." I dropped the book on the floor. I crouched down next to the massive desk. I pulled the bottom drawer out all the way. It was filled with old checkbooks and dried-up fountain pens. I reached my hand to the back, feeling the wood. There was a groove. I dug my fingernail into it and pulled. With a sharp click, a panel popped open. Inside was a small velvet-lined cavity. It held two things. First, a small wooden box. Second, a cassette tape. I pulled the box out. It was heavy, made of dark walnut. I opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded red satin, was another brooch. It was identical to the one I was wearing, a sapphire butterfly. They were a set, Eleanor whispered, looking over my shoulder. "One for your mother, one for you. She meant to give it to you when you turned 18. She never got the chance." I touched the cold gems. It felt like touching a ghost. Then I picked up the cassette tape. It was an old TDK 90-minute tape. On the label, in shaky, hurried handwriting, were 3 words: "The Blood Contract." "We need a tape player," I said, my voice tight. "Do we even have one?" "The attic," Evans said, appearing in the doorway like he had been summoned by the tension in the room. "I kept the old stereo equipment." 10 minutes later, we were huddled around a dusty boombox on the library table. I plugged it in. The red power light flickered on. I pressed the eject button, the mechanical thunk echoing in the quiet room. I inserted the tape. I pressed play. For 10 seconds, there was only the hiss of static. Then a voice cut through the noise. It was breathless, terrified. "If you are listening to this, I am dead." Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Sarah," she wept. "That's her. That's your mother." I leaned in, staring at the spinning spools of magnetic tape. "Elijah won't listen," my mother's voice continued. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. "He thinks we can buy them off. But the Sullivans don't want money. They want blood. The contract—" I found the copy in the safe. It says, "A life for a life," because of the accident at the mine. The Sullivans? Keith's family? "They are coming," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I can hear the car on the gravel. I have to hide Zoe. I have to—" Suddenly there was a loud crash on the recording, the sound of a door being kicked in. "No!" my mother screamed. "Get away! Don't touch her!" There was a dull thud, a sickening, wet sound, then heavy footsteps crunching on glass. The tape hissed for another minute, recording only the silence of a room where someone had just died. Then it clicked off. I sat frozen. My mother hadn't died in a tragic accident or a robbery gone wrong. She was executed, and she had named her killers. "The Sullivans," I whispered. I looked up at Evans. "Keith Sullivan. He's been helping me. He's one of them." "Keith was a child when this happened," Evans said, his face pale. "But his father was the head of the family then." "And his uncle," I said, remembering the news stories I had read about the Sullivan family tree. "Arthur Sullivan." The intercom buzzed. "Miss Vance," the security guard's voice crackled. "Mr. Keith Sullivan is at the gate. He says it is urgent. He has a guest." I looked at the boombox, then at Evans. "Let them in." I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to know if the man who wiped wine off my dress was the son of the man who murdered my mother. 10 minutes later, the library doors opened. Keith strode in, looking energized. Beside him walked an older man. He was tall, silver-haired, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He wore a suit that cost more than a car. "Zoe," Keith said, walking toward me with a smile. "I tried to call, but your line was busy. I want you to meet someone. This is my uncle, Arthur Sullivan. He just flew in from London to help us fight Helix Capital." Arthur Sullivan smiled. It was a warm, grandfatherly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, my dear," Arthur said, extending a hand. "You look so much like your mother. It's haunting." I didn't shake his hand. I stood behind the desk, clutching the cassette tape in my fist behind my back. "You knew her?" I asked. "Very well," Arthur said. He looked around the room, taking in the ledgers, the boxes. "Keith tells me you are digging into the past. Dangerous business digging." "We found something," Keith said, oblivious to the tension radiating off me. "Uncle Arthur has files on Helix. He thinks he knows who is funding them." "I do," Arthur said. "But before we discuss business, there is a personal matter we must resolve, a delicate matter." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. He placed it gently on the desk. "What is this?" I asked. "Keith has been quite taken with you." Arthur said, glancing at his nephew with a look of pity. "It is understandable. You are a captivating young woman. But this attraction, it cannot continue." "Uncle, what are you doing?" Keith asked, his brow furrowing. "I am saving you from a grave sin, nephew," Arthur said. He tapped the folder. 23 years ago, your father, Elijah, and my sister-in-law, Keith's mother, had an affair. It was brief, passionate, and it resulted in a child." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "Open it," Arthur commanded softly. I opened the folder. It was a DNA test result, stamped with the seal of a laboratory in Switzerland. It compared 2 samples. Sample A, Elijah Vance. Sample B, Keith Sullivan. Probability of paternal relationship, 99.9%. The room spun. I looked at Keith. He was staring at the paper, his face draining of all color. "We're siblings?" Keith choked out. "Half-siblings?" "Yes," Arthur said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "That is why the families hated each other. That is why the feud started. It wasn't business. It was infidelity. And now, seeing you two together, it is nature playing a cruel joke." I felt bile rise in my throat. The connection I had felt with Keith, the spark on the balcony, the trust, suddenly felt dirty, incestuous. I looked at Keith. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "Get out," I whispered. "Zoe, I didn't know," Keith stammered, backing away. "I swear to God I didn't know." "Get out," I screamed, throwing the folder at him, papers scattered across the floor. Arthur stood his ground, a small, satisfied smirk touching his lips before he masked it with concern. "Come, Keith, let her process this." They left. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. I ran to the bathroom attached to the study and dry-heaved into the sink. Nothing came out but bitter bile. My brother. The only person in this entire nightmare world who had treated me like a human being, the only man who had looked at me with respect instead of greed, was my brother. "It's a lie," Eleanor said, standing in the doorway of the bathroom. "It has to be a lie. Elijah never mentioned—" "Elijah lied about everything," I shouted, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "He lied about my mother's death. He lied about why he sent me away. Why wouldn't he lie about a bastard son?" I walked back into the study and stared at the scattered papers. The DNA test looked so official. The numbers were precise. "I am alone," I said, the realization settling over me like a shroud. "I have no allies. Rick was a plant. My father is dying. My mother was murdered. And the one person I trusted is forbidden." I walked to the desk and grabbed the stack of financial ledgers. "Fine," I said, my voice hardening into something brittle and sharp. "If I don't have family, I'll have the company. That's all that's left." I sat down and started working. I worked with a manic intensity, cross-referencing numbers, highlighting fraud, building a case. I worked to drown out the sound of my mother's scream on the tape and the look of horror on Keith's face. I worked until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. I worked until the sun went down and the moon came up. I was going to destroy them, all of them. It was 3 a.m. when my cell phone buzzed. It danced across the mahogany desk, vibrating against the wood. I looked at the screen. Rick. I stared at it. Why was he calling? To beg for money? To threaten me? I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, maybe the frantic persistence of the buzzing, made me answer. "What do you want, Rick?" I asked, my voice flat. "I'm busy." "Zoe. Sadie. Whatever your name is." Rick's voice came through the line. He was whispering. I could hear heavy rain in the background pounding against metal. He sounded terrified. "You have to help me, please. They're going to kill me." "Who is going to kill you?" I asked, rolling my eyes. "The loan sharks?" "No, the suits," Rick rushed out. I went back to the condo to get my stuff. Tara was there. She was on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. She was talking to a guy. She called him Mr. Sullivan. My hand froze on the mouse. Which Sullivan, Rick? Keith or Arthur? I don't know, just Sullivan. But she was talking about a diary, Eleanor's diary. She said the old lady knows where the bodies are buried. She said they have to clean up loose ends tonight. Eleanor, I breathed. Rick, where are you? I'm at the old bridge, Rick stammered. Under the overpass on I-85. My car broke down. I think they cut the fuel line. Sadie, I see headlights. They're coming down the service road. Rick, run, I said, standing up. Get out of the car and run into the woods. I can't, he sobbed. I'm sorry, Sadie. I'm so sorry for everything. I was just... Crunch. It was a loud metallic impact, glass shattering, metal twisting. Rick, I shouted. Rick! There was a sound of a car door opening, heavy footsteps in the rain. Please, Rick's voice whimpered, distant now as if the phone had been dropped. I don't know anything, I swear. Bang. A single sharp gunshot, then silence. Rick! I screamed into the phone. A new voice came on the line. It was distorted, calm, and chillingly familiar. Wrong number, Miss Vance. The line went dead. Oh. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair, staring at the phone, waiting for something. At 7 a.m, the news alert popped up on my laptop. Local man found dead in apparent suicide. I clicked the link. The photo was a mugshot of Rick from a DUI arrest 3 years ago. Police discovered the body of Richard Price, 29, under the I-85 overpass early this morning. Authorities state that Price, who was reportedly suffering from significant gambling debts, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A suicide note was found on the scene. Lies, I hissed. It's all lies. I stood up. I felt cold, colder than I had ever felt in the trailer park in winter. They killed him. They killed him because he heard a name, Sullivan, and they killed him because he warned me. I looked at the phone. I had one number left to call. The one person who was supposedly my enemy, my brother, my forbidden ally. I dialed Keith. He answered on the first ring. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept either. Zoe, he said. Shut up, I said. Don't talk to me about the DNA. Don't talk to me about feelings. Rick is dead. What? Keith sounded genuinely shocked. They murdered him, Keith, and they made it look like a suicide. He called me right before it happened. He said Tara was talking to a Sullivan. Silence on the line. Heavy, pregnant silence. It wasn't me, Keith said quietly. I know, I said, because you were with your uncle, which means it was Arthur. Your uncle is killing people, Keith. He killed my mother. He killed my ex-husband, and he's poisoning my father. Zoe, that's insane, Keith said, but his voice wavered. Is it? I asked. Meet me. Not at the office, not at the house. Meet me at the Waffle House on Highway 9. Come alone. If you bring your uncle, I will disappear, and you will never see the Vance fortune or your sister ever again. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Keith said. I hung up. I grabbed the cassette tape, the toxicologist's preliminary report that Evans had slid under my door an hour ago, confirming arsenic, and the Swiss bank ledger. I wasn't a waitress anymore. I wasn't an heiress. I was a hunter, and I was going to take down the biggest game in the forest. I sat in the booth at the Waffle House, watching Keith tear a paper napkin into tiny confetti-sized strips. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. So, Keith said, his voice raspy, you think my Uncle Arthur is a serial killer? I think your Uncle Arthur likes control, I said, pushing the toxicology report across the table. It sat next to his untouched eggs. And people who threaten that control tend to stop breathing. Rick threatened him, my mother threatened him, and now my father is full of arsenic. Keith picked up the report. He read the numbers. Arsenic levels, 45 micrograms per liter. He closed his eyes. He made me tea. Keith whispered. "When I was a kid, after my dad died, he always made me tea. Was he trying to—" "We can't ask him," I said, leaning forward. "If we ask, he disappears. Or we do. We have to trap him." "How?" "Money," I said. "It's the only thing he cares about. We need to make him think he's winning. We need to make him think he's about to swallow Solaris Ventures whole." "The poison pill," Keith said, looking up. "We tank the stock. We drive the price down so low that he can't resist buying a controlling interest. Once he moves his money from the offshore accounts to buy the shares, we track the transaction. We prove the money is coming from the same accounts that paid Tara and Ross." "It's risky," I said. "If we tank the stock, we might lose the company for real. We're betting the farm." Keith reached across the table. His hand hovered over mine for a second, then pulled back, remembering the DNA test, the lie. "Let's bet it," he said. "I don't want the money anymore. I just want the truth." The plan was simple. I would go on live television and make a catastrophic business decision. I stood at the podium in the Solaris press room. The lights were blinding. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, "after reviewing the portfolio, I have decided to liquidate our entire renewable energy division. We will be pivoting Solaris Ventures into print media." A gasp went through the room. Print media? In 2024? It was financial suicide. "Thank you," I said, and walked off stage. I went straight to the war room where Keith was monitoring the markets on 3 different laptops. "It's working," Keith said, pointing to the screen. "Solaris stock just dropped 12%. Panic selling." I watched the red line plummet. $70 a share. 60. 55. "Come on, Arthur," I whispered. "Buy it. Be greedy." We waited. 10 minutes. 20. The stock hit $40. "He's not buying," Keith said, frowning. "The volume is weird. There are no buy orders coming in. It's just more selling." He typed furiously. His face went pale. "Zoe, look at this." He turned the screen toward me. A massive block of shares had just been dumped onto the market. 5 million shares. "He's not buying the dip," Keith said, his voice horrified. "He's shorting it. He's dumping stock he doesn't even own yet. He knew." "He knew?" "He figured it out," Keith said, slamming his fist on the desk. "He knows we're trying to trap him. So he's not taking the bait. He's burying us. He's going to drive the price to 0. He's going to bankrupt the company by noon." My phone buzzed. A text message. "Unknown number. Nice try, niece. But you're playing checkers. I'm playing chess." I stared at the screen. We had just destroyed my father's legacy. We had handed Arthur the victory on a silver platter. "We lost," I said, sliding down the wall of the war room. "It's over." My phone buzzed again. Another message. "The Observer. Meet me. Central Cathedral, alone, midnight." Below it was a picture of a butterfly. "I'm going," I said, standing up. "It's a trap," Keith warned. "I don't care," I said. "I have nothing left to lose. He already took the company." I drove to the cathedral in the pouring rain. The old stone building loomed like a gargoyle against the night sky. The doors were unlocked. I walked down the center aisle, my wet shoes squeaking on the stone floor. It was empty. "Hello?" I called out. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the confessional booth. She was wearing a heavy black raincoat with the hood up. She lowered the hood. I froze. "Eleanor?" She looked older. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face swollen from crying. "You?" I stammered. "You're the Observer. But you're his wife. You're my stepmother." "No," Eleanor whispered. She walked toward me, her hands trembling. "I am not your stepmother, Zoe, and I am not Eleanor." "What?" "My name is Elise," she said. "I am your mother's twin sister." The world tilted on its axis. "Twin. But we were identical," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "When your mother discovered the truth about the blood contract, she knew she was going to die. She called me. We switched places often when we were kids. After After Arthur had her killed, I couldn't leave you. I couldn't leave Elijah. She grabbed my hands. Her grip was desperate. I took her identity, she sobbed. I became the second wife. I married the man who let my sister die so I could stay close to the evidence. I've been waiting 20 years for you to come back. I've been waiting for someone strong enough to fight him. The tape, I said. The tape said blood contract. What is it? Elise pulled a leather-bound notebook from her coat. It was old, the leather cracked and worn. This is the real diary, she said. Your mother kept it. The blood contract wasn't a business deal. It was a threat. Arthur Sullivan managed the mine where your grandparents died. He cut corners on safety to save money. The explosion, it wasn't an accident. It was negligence. I opened the book, my mother's handwriting. Arthur knows that Elijah found the safety reports. He threatened to kill us all if the reports ever surfaced. He demands a marriage alliance to keep the families bound, to keep us silent. He wanted the fortunes combined, Elise said. He wanted Solaris and TerraVision to merge so he could control the combined assets. When your mother tried to expose him, he had her killed. And now he's doing it to me, I realized. He faked the DNA test, didn't he? Elise nodded. He needed to separate you and Keith. If you two united, you'd be unstoppable. So he invented the incest lie to make you hate each other. I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked me over. Not my brother. The safety reports, I said. Where are they? If we have those, Arthur goes to prison for corporate manslaughter. Elise turned to the last page of the diary. There was a riddle scrawled in red ink. Where the butterflies rest, the truth is buried. The butterflies, I whispered. I touched the brooch on my chest, the ancestral altar at the country house. I called Keith. Meet me at the country estate. Bring a crowbar. And Keith, we aren't related. We met at the gates of the old Vance Manor at 2 a.m. The rain had turned into a thunderstorm. Keith looked at me, soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead. Not related? He asked, his voice cracking. Arthur lied, I said. He lied about everything. We ran into the house. The electricity was cut, so we used our phone flashlights, the beams cutting through the dusty darkness. We found the ancestral altar in the main hall. It was a massive wooden structure carved with intricate designs. In the center, carved into the wood, was a large butterfly. Give me the brooch, Keith said. I handed it to him. He pressed the sapphire butterfly into the carving. It fit perfectly. Click. A grinding sound echoed through the hall. The floorboards in front of the altar slid open, revealing a dark stone staircase going down. A panic room, Keith said. We descended. The air was stale and cold. At the bottom was a small room with a single metal safe. The combination, I said. Try the date of the mine explosion. Keith spun the dial. Left, right, left. The safe clicked open. Inside wasn't paper. It was a hard drive. We ran back upstairs and plugged it into Keith's laptop. A video file popped up. It was Keith's mother. She looked terrified. My husband. Arthur killed him, she whispered to the camera. He cut the brake lines on the car. He wants the company. He wants it all. I hid the safety reports on this drive. If you find this, run. Keith stared at the screen. He killed my dad. He killed his own brother. We have him, I said. This is murder. We have the proof. My phone rang. It was Elise. Zoe, she screamed. He's here. Arthur is at the hospital. He knows. The nurse called him. He knows we requested the toxicology report. He's going to finish Elijah. We drove like maniacs. Keith ran 2 red lights and drove over a median. We skidded to a halt in front of the hospital emergency entrance. Call the police, Keith shouted at me as he sprinted toward the doors. Tell them, officer down. Get them here now. We raced to the elevator. The 4th floor. The doors opened. Chaos. A nurse was screaming. A security guard was on the floor, clutching his head. Arthur was in my father's room. He was standing over the bed, a syringe in his hand. He looked deranged. His suit was disheveled, his tie missing. "Stop!" Keith roared. Arthur spun around. He saw us. He saw the hard drive in Keith's hand. "You!" Arthur hissed. "You cockroaches! Why won't you just die?" He lunged for the IV line. Keith tackled him. They crashed into the medical cart, sending trays of instruments clattering across the floor. The syringe flew out of Arthur's hand and skittered under the bed. Arthur was older, but he was fighting with the strength of a madman. He kicked Keith in the chest and scrambled up. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He grabbed a scalpel from the floor. He grabbed the nearest nurse, a young woman who had been checking the monitors. He held the blade to her throat. "Back off!" he screamed. "Back off, or I open her up!" "Arthur, it's over," I yelled. "We have the drive. We have the video. Everyone knows." "I don't care," Arthur spat. He dragged the nurse toward the fire escape door. "I built this empire. I did the dirty work while my brother played the saint. It belongs to me." He kicked the door open and dragged the weeping nurse up the stairs. We followed. The roof was being hammered by rain. The wind was howling. Arthur backed up toward the ledge, the nurse sobbing in his grip. "There's nowhere to go, Uncle," Keith said, stepping out into the rain. "The police are downstairs. The building is surrounded." "I won't go to prison," Arthur screamed. "I am a Sullivan. I am a king." "You're a murderer," I said, stepping up beside Keith. "You killed my mother. You killed your brother. You killed Rick. You're nothing but a thief." "I did what was necessary," Arthur roared. He took a step back. His heel hit the low concrete barrier. He looked down. 7 stories of darkness. He looked at us. A look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "If I go," he sneered, "I take the future with me." He raised the scalpel to plunge it into the nurse. Bang! A single shot rang out from the stairwell door. Arthur's shoulder exploded in a spray of red. He dropped the scalpel. The nurse scrambled away, crawling across the wet gravel. Arthur stumbled back. Ideally, he would have grabbed the railing, but the rain was slick. His expensive Italian leather shoes found no purchase. He slipped. His arms milled wildly in the air. For a second, our eyes locked. He looked surprised. Then he was gone. There was no scream, just a silence that was louder than the storm. Keith ran to the edge. I followed. Far below, on the concrete awning of the entrance, was a broken shape. "It's over," Keith whispered, grabbing my hand. He squeezed it so hard it hurt. "Zoe, it's finally over." I looked at him. My brother, who wasn't my brother. My partner. "Yeah," I said, leaning my head against his wet shoulder. "Now the real work begins." So, a lot has happened since the night Arthur took the express elevator down. The police investigation was massive. The hard drive we found proved everything: the mine safety fraud, the murders, the embezzlement. Helix Capital was raided by the FBI the next morning. It turns out Arthur had been siphoning money from both family companies for decades. Solaris Ventures didn't go bankrupt. Once the truth came out, the stock rebounded. In fact, it hit an all-time high last week. My father, Elijah, is awake. The doctors flushed the arsenic out of his system. He's weak and he'll never run the company again, but he's alive. We talk every day. He cries a lot. He apologized for sending me away, for the lies. I haven't fully forgiven him yet. You don't get over 20 years of abandonment in a month, but we're working on it. Eleanor, or Elise, as I call her now, has officially come out as my aunt. She's moving to Paris to finally live her own life, but she promised to visit for holidays. As for the company, Keith and I made a decision. We merged Solaris Ventures and Terra Vision. The new entity is called United Wings Holdings. And yesterday was the best part. Keith drove me out to the old neighborhood. He bought the lot where the trailer park used to be. He had it cleared. In the center, he built a garden, a wisteria garden, just like the one in the storybooks I used to read. We walked under the purple flowers. He stopped, looked at me with those intense eyes, and pulled out a box. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a ring with 2 sapphire butterflies meeting in the middle. "No more contracts," he said. "No more business, just us." He asked me to marry him. I said yes. I'm Zoe Vance. I was a waitress. I was a victim. I was a pawn. But today I'm the CEO. I'm a fiancé. And for the first time in my life, I'm free. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.